Hello and welcome to TOCA Backstage. This is Chris Wolf, the Executive Director of the Torrance Cultural Arts Foundation. I am here with Sarah Jane Scouten, who will be part of our Studio Cabaret series on October 26th and 27th at the Nakano Theater. Sarah, it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you.
So tell me, what people may not be familiar with your music here in California. What is the best way you would describe your music?
We like to call it space country music. So somewhere between Loretta Lynn and Fairport Convention. I've been looking at folk festivals all day. Loretta Lynn and Fairport Convention.
And as I understand it, you're in Canada, right?
Yeah, I live in Toronto, which is just north of, well, you guys know where Toronto is.
And how did you discover that was your type of music?
Honestly, it was just sort of accepting that it was my type of music. I think I rebelled against it for a while. In Canada, I think that you either play folk music or you play country music. And or you play whatever, jazz or metal or whatever, but like within that realm, it's either folk or country. We haven't kind of accepted the existence of Americana music because there's very different politics surrounding both genres. So I've had to just accept that I'm a Canadian Americana artist, you know?
And there's nothing wrong with that. So I was actually like, I've been listening to your stuff, and one song that I really actually liked a lot was "Crack in Your Windshield."
Oh, you're a feeler.
A Felix?
No, you're a feeler. You have
feeler. Yeah, I like that song. What was the inspiration behind it?
My brother is a special kiddo, and he was brought into the world into very, well, unusual circumstances. Our mother died giving birth to my brother, and that anyone carries a lot of weight when that happens to them, and he's been the survivor, I'd say, of a lot of mental health problems. And he's really thriving now. But he wasn't doing very well at the time when I wrote that song. And he was in the hospital again for, I don't know, maybe the third or fourth time. But I think it was the last time. And I was on tour in the bleakest months of the year in Manitoba, which is north of North Dakota. And it was so cold. And I was driving along, and there was a big truck that came along and threw a pebble up into my windshield of my rental car, and it cracked it the whole way across. And after I was done being very angry, I discovered that it was very beautiful. It was like this long, thin prism. And it started me thinking about what Leonard Cohen says, that there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And I felt as if that applied to my brother more than anybody else who I knew. And so I wrote that song for him, I think, that afternoon.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how you describe me as a feeler? What is that? What your songs have different tones for different people?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that there are people who know me really well who have trouble listening to that song without getting really choked up. I love that song, and I'm really proud of it. So I'm glad that you like it too.
Are there other categories of, like, if I had picked another song, would I have been something else?
I guess so. I mean, if you really liked Bang Bang, I would have been like, well, that might be the most obvious choice. But also, that song, for some reason, gets people because it doesn't make any sense. People ask me, what is that song about? And I'm like, I have no idea. I really have no idea. Your guess is as good as mine.
Awesome. So how many albums have you put out so far?
I've put out 3 full-length albums and an EP, so like a short record, 4 songs, and we're working on a 4th full length in November.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so how did you just find that you had this talent? I mean, because you're obviously a great performer and a beautiful voice.
Thank you.
I'm also assuming you play, because I haven't watched the videos, but I'm assuming you also play guitar.
Yep.
And
I play guitar and a bit of fiddle as well.
And you write all your stuff. That's like a triple threat. How did you find that you had this talent?
I have always been performing, at least in the house. I come from a theater background as well. I grew up on an island called Bowen Island, which has, I think the statistic has the 5th highest artists per capita in Canada. It's part of the San Juan Island, so it's just north of Orcas Island in Washington State. So I was just inundated with the arts, musicians and actors mostly, and they were coming and going throughout our house. And I got involved in doing a lot of theater, but I like to incorporate music wherever I could. I don't know, for a while I thought I was going to be an actor and I would go to school to become an actor, and then I kind of veered away from that. I don't think I really like the materialism of that world. You know, sure, you might want to be doing Shakespeare for the rest of your life, but let's face it, you're going to be doing commercials to pay the bills, right? And anyways, I got to get my theater fix, or my performance fix, through writing and performing my own music, which often has a very theatrical aspect. A lot of my songs are narrative. They're these microfiction or ballads, yeah. So that's kind of how it all happened.
And you say, so this island you came from has like the largest capita of artists.
Fifth highest in the country.
Were your parents artists?
Yeah. I mean, of sorts. My dad is a banjo picking lawyer.
That's awesome.
He always had these bands. I remember we were little, and when he'd get together with his friends and they had kids too, they wanted to have a way for the kids to join them while they were playing. So they made a wash tub bass, which for the longest time we called gut buckets. So like a long piece of elastic and a stick and a metal wash basin. That was okay for us to thump away on while they, got down to business of singing, Bill Monroe and Hank Williams and Dan Rogers.
And so you've that sort of fed your I guess got you started. Yes, is that?
Yeah, I think it started because all of us, like, there's 3 kids in my family and all of us are songwriters, so there must have been something weird floating around. And the closest approximation I can get is to figure that was a way for us to connect with our dad. He's a quiet guy, and he's also a workaholic, and he will admit that. So we didn't get to see a lot of him, especially because his commutes were so long. He was commuting off of an island, 2-hour commutes, back and forth to get to the city. And he's a lawyer, so he worked really long hours. So on the weekends, for him to unwind, he'd play his banjo and he played guitar. And if I wanted to hang out with my dad, I had to kind of do what he wanted to do. So usually that meant sitting on the couch and listening to music or singing songs. And he loved teaching me and my sister to sing 3-part harmony with him. So we've been doing that since we were little. A lot of gospel tunes, some Sacred Harp songs and stuff. We didn't come from a particularly spiritual family, but we'd go to church sometimes and sing in the choir and stuff. So yeah, I think that music was a way for us to connect with our dad, but also my mom really facilitated music in the house as well, because she'd plan these music parties where all of her friends and my dad's friends would come and they'd play music and they'd eat tons of food. And us kids just got to like run around and watch our parents, let loose and stuff, and we could take part because we had that thing in common, which is to play music together.
That's awesome. That sounds like a great upbringing.
I can't complain. It was pretty idyllic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And any plans of incorporating, or do you incorporate your siblings or your
Yeah. So if you listen to, well, any of my records, the high harmony is my sister. She records on all of my records because I'm sure you working in music, you understand that like nothing beats blood harmony, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having voices that are biologically related does something really, really eerie. And then when you have someone who's a singer of the quality that my sister is, her name is Jane Scouten, and she was somewhat of a YouTube sensation as a child or a teenager. She's the best singer I know. She's just mind-blowing. Doesn't want to have a career in music. She's happy to sing on my records, and I'm happy to have her. So there you go.
Does she tour with you?
Sometimes. She's not much of a performer. She's a bit of a shirking violet. She'd much rather, she plays with microscopes as a hobby and is a potter. She's kind of like a quiet little nerd, and she loves the kind of microscopic, quiet side of life. Whereas I'm big and showy enough for both of us. So,
we in Torrance we do a thing every year called South Bay's Got Talent. We have a lot of kids come out, like anywhere from 8 to in the early teens, and I have found that a lot of them write their own stuff.
Yeah.
As a songwriter, I mean, that's something that's obviously beyond my realm.
Not necessarily, but
if you read any of my poetry when I was a teenager, you would trust me. It's beyond my realm.
Oh, my poetry as a teenager, really, it wasn't promising.
What advice do you give, or would you give, to young up and coming performers and songwriters?
From a songwriting perspective, I think that people need to know what they're writing about. Not necessarily during the process, but after the song is done, because so much of songwriting is editing, or any kind of writing is editing. I teach songwriting at a bunch of camps and stuff, and sometimes I do it privately, and I run little workshops. And that's a big thing, is people not knowing what they're singing about necessarily. And that can really, if they're lost in it, they're not going to hang on to a listener. It's a soundbite. It's, about 3.5 minutes usually. How much are you going to throw at them before they are going to, lose interest? And that can be, you can either be too abstract, or you can be too cliche. There's this sort of originality sweet spot that you have to find while knowing what you're trying to say.
Yeah. What do you think is the hardest part of being a songwriter?
Well, you've got to tell yourself that you have a legitimate perspective. And sometimes that's just like, for me, it's just been a matter of time, just being like, I've been doing this for long enough and people seem to like it, so I'm just going to accept that it's good, because you can't, it's hard to have objectivity about your work. So often when I bring a song to a band and I see their reaction, or I perform it in front of an audience, that's when I can sort of validate the song, and therefore validate myself in my job. You're like, oh, okay, I'm still doing my job right, because I've elicited a reaction in a listener. Made them feel something, which is, I think, the ultimate goal.
Well, and I think too, don't artists, I would assume, they're pursuing their passion and they're doing what they truly love. And sometimes I know from somebody who works in the theater, when I go to the theater, I'm like, I'm doing something I really, really enjoy doing, and I'm getting paid for it.
Right.
It's almost like you feel guilty. It's like, No, you don't have to really pay me, but I'm glad you
That's
do.
like this weird Protestant work ethic of like our ancestors coming from Europe and, you know, pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and stuff. That's a North American concept, I think, that
Yeah.
that we shouldn't be paid if we're enjoying ourselves.
And it's too bad. I think
Yeah.
it is too bad. And that's, you know, the foundation, the organization that I work with, uh, our goal is not only just to produce these great shows and bring in talented people like yourself to perform, but we also try to encourage up and coming artists and try and give them, you know, a head start or at least sound advice from professionals. So I think that's one of the things that I try to tell people is it's okay to go out there and have a good time and get paid for it, and
Yeah.
don't feel like you can't do that.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why the arts become uh, more and more undervalued. You know, people are more willing to spend money on a sandwich than they are on, you know, a beautiful concert of, you know, music with like a full band, right?
Yes.
Uh, if artists all, you know, decide that their craft is worth something, then people will acknowledge that. It's part of like almost a cultural fabric. I spend a lot of time in Europe, where it's not unheard of to be paid significantly more, and people still feeling like they're not giving enough to you, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. Do you find that there's a big difference between the Canadian audience and the U.S. audience?
Uh, I mean, the United States population is 10 times that of Canada. So I would say that American audiences are probably very different in different places. But by and large, I've found American audiences more expressive, and therefore I kind of get more feedback from them, and it's more encouraging. Sometimes it's bizarre to me when I get certain reactions from American audiences. That's something that I'm learning. I remember one time I said, almost in passing, I said "God bless America" on a in where was I, in Montana a couple months ago, and everyone started clapping, and I was fascinated because in Canada that would never happen. Never.
Why? Well, you mean if you said "God bless Canada," that people wouldn't applaud, or if you said "God bless America," people wouldn't applaud?
Oh no! Oh, neither. We would just chuckle at both of them.
Hmm. Um, that's interesting. With the theater where you're going to perform in for the Studio Cabaret, it's really an intimate, super intimate venue,
Great.
and we have uh, a very devout group of subscribers who will come and see just about anything, and usually their reaction is almost always very positive. But you had mentioned how you sort of get that feedback from the audience. This group will be very uh, I guess they're not afraid to talk to you if you talk to them.
Oh, great. Oh man, that's fantastic. That's actually, I'm so glad, because that's exactly where I'm happiest.
Oh, good.
Like breaking that fourth wall down, you know, the kind of arbitrary division between the performer and the audience member. I love talking to people on stage.
Great. Well, then they'll love you too, because I have found that if a performer just goes up, does their job, and leave, they the audience doesn't have that same sort of, I guess, relationship with them. Whereas if a performer gets up there and has that banter and has that sort of almost one-on-one with these 100 people, they just love it. And
You know, that's something that Canadian artists are, for some reason, conditioned to do. I don't know what it is. Like sometimes it's like I would say we even are a bit too chatty sometimes. I've been learning to rein it in. Uh, oh yeah, don't worry. Yeah, I can see why people would want to have a unique show that was tailored to them.
Sure.
And that's I mean, if that's what they want, that's what they're going to get. That's great.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to it. So if you were to say, what was the one thing that you would want people to walk away from your concert with?
Oh my
Besides a
God.
CD.
Yeah, a copy of the book. I mean, I suppose I would like them to walk away with sort of a collection of feelings rather than just one. I like to take people on an emotional journey. So sometimes my songwriting can be zany and really fun, and sometimes it can be really dark. And sometimes it's just kind of like sweet and fuzzy, or maybe just a little bit like trippy and psychedelic. I would hope that people feel comfortable exploring multiple different sensations of like of an Americana style show. We're not just going for one thing. I couldn't say that I'm a mellow songwriter even though I've written mellow songs, or that I'm like really rock and roll and hard driving even though I've written rock and roll and hard driving songs. There's a wide breadth, and I hope that people are willing to go there with me, essentially.
Well, I'm sure they will. And I have a question about, what is that behind you? Is that a woodcut piece?
Yeah. So this is, can you see it? It says VNN, which is in Luxembourgish. So Luxembourg is a small country where my husband lives. It's sort of the armpit of Belgium, France, and Germany, and you can drive its perimeter in a matter of hours. So this is this beautiful town. It's like medieval Germanic castle. Vanen has way too many consonants in it. Sorry, vowels in it. But if they Google Vianden, that's the French word for it. Viande, Vianden. Gorgeous photos of this castle will come up. So I just picked it up there. It's
very cool.
Yeah.
And so how many people in your band?
4.
And you mentioned your husband. Is he also a musician?
He is musical. However, he's a booking agent, which is convenient.
That is convenient.
We've got a nice little family business.
Awesome. Well, that about wraps it up. So I just want to remind people, Sarah Jane Scouten, October 26th and 27th at the Nakano Theater, part of the Studio Cabaret series. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We will look forward to meeting you in person when you come out to the States.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
We'll